Okay, so we're going to take some line art and we're going to bring it into Illustrator and colorize it. We're going to vectorize it. But before I do that, I bring it into Photoshop and clean some stuff up. If you want to make this easier on yourself than harder on yourself, which I would recommend, in Illustrator, or I'm sorry, in Photoshop rather, I would close my paths. Now what I mean by that is, here I have a mountain and it's open. And if I wanted to just select this area and colorize it in Illustrator, what it's going to do is it's not going to create there's no closed path, and I'll have problems with it. I'll have to draw this whole section. So I'm going to get the pencil tool and get some black color, just regular black. We'll just go 0, 0, and 100 on the black. And even if it's only 1 pixel, I want to go in here and I want to close any open paths. And you want to do it kind of nicely. Again, I'm using a mouse, so it's not as easy as it would be if I were using a tablet. But these areas right here, if I wanted to separate them and colorize them different colors, they all need to be closed. So if you see anything that that's open and not closed, it will give you problems in Illustrator. So the first thing I'll do is I'll either do this to my artwork that I've drawn, or I'll do it here after I've scanned it in. So again, closing paths, even down to the edge of the paper. Like this artwork doesn't go to the edge of the paper, so I'll draw something that goes to the edge of the paper. So this sort of cleanup takes a while. That's why oftentimes I'll do it on my artwork before I scan it in. So I've got a lot of open areas in some of my illustration here. So I want to close those areas up, or make sure they're drawn all the way to the edge of the paper. And I might leave one open just to show you what problems I'll get in Illustrator, so you know why I'm doing this. So I'll leave this one open up here, and we'll see why it's important that we close our paths. So I'll leave that one right there open. Okay, it looks like I've closed most of my paths now. I really haven't spent a lot of time doing this, so there might be some still open. So I'm going to save this. This is my Photoshop scan that I did earlier. Now, if you're taking this from Photoshop to Illustrator, I would highly recommend that you scan this in at 150 pixels per inch. Now, if you've already scanned it in at 300 and you've been playing around with it, then you can just simply go to Image and Image Size and change that to 150 pixels per inch. That's pretty low resolution. But what will happen is if it's too high of a resolution, then you may have some problems with Illustrator making way too many what are called anchor points or nodes. Now, I'm still, for some reason when it did that, it got rid of some of my pencils, so now I have to go in and do this again, unfortunately. I'm just making sure my paths are closed. Again, this is not fun. It's like watching paint dry, I know. Yeah, you want a fairly low resolution, not 72. We've learned through trial and error that 72 is a little too low. But 150 has worked for most circumstances pretty well. 72 just doesn't quite cut the mustard, so to speak. Alright, so again, I'm going through and investigating open paths and closing them. Now, even on the edge of a page, oops, I accidentally moved my Photoshop document. What happened there? Let's see what happened. I did something really squirrely. I really squirreled this one up. Oh gosh. I must have had a hold of something that I wasn't supposed to have a hold of when I moved this around. So here we are. Jeez. Sometimes when you're zoomed in, it's not the best thing. I must have grabbed the hand tool. Oh, you know what I did is I held down the shift key and I grabbed the hand tool, or to the hand tool, and I moved the whole piece, and or not the shift key, but the space bar. Okay, so I'm going to leave some of these paths open just so you can, I'm just going to leave them open so you can see the big difficulty I'm going to have in colorizing this. Okay, so I'm going to save this as a different name. I'm going to call it Canoe 150. That lets me know that there's 150 ppi. I could even put ppi after it. And then I'm going to close Photoshop and I'm going to bring this into Illustrator, not InDesign, excuse me, Illustrator. And create a new document. Now, according to the guidelines, it said that this needed to be a letter-size document, so that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to place this graphic into Illustrator by going to File and Place. So I don't copy and paste from Photoshop. I just simply just go to File and Place. I can find my 150 pixels per inch canoe, and I pop it in there. Now, it's not very big. It's only about 5 by 5. But I'll be able to work with it. Now, right now, this is considered a pixel-based graphic. It's a linked object, meaning it's not a. It has to still link up to it to be able to print it and things. But it's not a vector yet. No. But I'm going to do what's called an image trace on this. Now, they used to call it live trace in the old software. So if you have Creative Suite before Creative Cloud, it'll be called live trace. But this is an image trace. Now, image trace has some tracing options. And I like to use custom, but it's grayed out. So I suppose I could do line art and just see what happens. I'm probably not going to appreciate the finished product here. We'll see. This is why I typically like to not let the computer make choices for me, and I will use... oh, that actually doesn't look too bad, and that's not the style I was going for. I wanted something a lot more detailed. But that is not what I wanted, so I'm going to hit Edit Undo. Now, in order to do a custom trace so I can preview what it's going to do, again, I can't click on custom, so you guys have to go to, oh, I haven't had to do this in a while. I think it's Object, Image Trace. Where's the custom? Oh, there's a custom somewhere. No, it has to be selected to be able to affect it.
Did you actually place it?
I did place it, and yes. Now, this is one of those things I haven't had to do in a while. Oh, I hate when this happens. There we go. There it is. Aha. So it's under Window, Image Trace. There it is. This is our custom setting. So I hit Preview. Now, the bad thing is this takes some memory. Now that looks more like my drawing. In fact, it's cleaned my drawing up a little bit. In fact, I'll zoom in. Let me cancel this and I'll zoom in. Hit Command Z. I'll zoom in a little bit. There we go. Move it over to the side so we can get that palette up. And go to, again, Window, Image Trace will give you your custom options. Now this is a default that's already in here. Default preset. I'm like, well, that looks good, but it got rid of some of the details I really wanted to keep. But it doesn't look bad. But what you can do is you can adjust your threshold, meaning, you know, is it more tolerant or less tolerant? Is it staying closer to your original lines, or is it kind of making up its own mind? So I want my tolerance at more. I also like the advanced feature because I can tell it how close I want it to stay to the original paths. Do I want the corners to be more tight or more rounded? And do I want any noise added? Or do I want it to try to keep it more like the original? So you can add noise or take away noise. So this gives you, so by putting up higher, it takes away some. So I want it a little bit closer to the original. Now, do you want fills and strokes? What that will do is it will give you the ability to, ooh, that doesn't even look good. Let's not do strokes. Let's just do fills. It strokes your black line that's already there. And snap curves to lines. Sure, I don't want to ignore white. I need white in there so I can select those white areas and make them colored. Now, what is cool about this new image trace is it tells me how many paths I'm going to have. 562 paths. 562 cutout shapes. Anchor points, which are your nodes, 6,311. That's a lot, but we'll see what it does. Now, as soon as I have everything that I would like here, wow, this is kind of neat. These are all new here. There's outline. I'm going to play with these, but right now I'm liking what I've got. I hit trace. You have to unselect preview for it to trace. So this is a little tricky because you're like, well, shouldn't I be able to have preview and trace on at the same time? Well, you should be able to, but for some reason it likes to have preview turned off before you hit trace. Now right now it should be tracing, and now I'm going to expand it. Okay, so it's traced it. So I'm going to hit the expand key, which converts the traced object into paths. Now when I said there's 6,000 nodes, that's what I mean by anchor points and nodes. There are 6,000s of those. The more anchor points there are, the more this has to calculate an x and y axes. So if I were to turn my rulers, x is one way, y is the other, and it calculates each anchor point. So vectors are based off mathematics, each anchor point being at an x and y axes and a certain Bezier curve. Now what I want to do here, you can simplify paths. Like if I came in here and went to object and I went to path and I told it to simplify it, I could do this. The only bad thing is my tracing result ends up being something completely different than what I wanted. So if I hit Command minus and go to edit, object, path, and simplify, hit on preview, it's like, oh, that looks like really bad. I'm going to hit OK and show you what it looks like. That does not look anything what I wanted. In fact, it starts to look not even like a boat. So let me undo that. But the key to anything is knowing how to use the tool. So if I go to simplify, my curve precision, if I hold it a little higher, it'll hold those pixels a little bit better. So the less the curve precision, the more of the, not pixels, but anchor points it'll take out. And you're just looking for something close to the original, but not so many anchor points. Now we may look at this and go, ew, that looks ugly. Or we may look at this and go, wow, that's kind of even cooler than what you had before. So it just depends what your preference is. So you may want to simplify paths if you find there's too many anchor points. Now to colorize this graphic, I use the white arrow tool, and I can click inside of any of these areas and I can color them. Now if I had a paint bucket, I could just sit there and paint it. There's a live paint tool that I really probably won't work on right now. Because there's a certain, don't use live paint tool. There's great things for live paint. If you have an object that you want to look like it's going in front of and then behind another object, that's great for live paint. So I wouldn't use that. I would just start filling these shapes with colors. So you use your swatches panel typically. Now if there's not enough swatches there, you can use the Pantone swatch palette, which is for printing. And in the swatches panel, there's a little flyout menu, and you can go to the swatch library, and you can open that. And you can say, you know what, I need to use color books. That's where we find our Pantone. And I'm going to use Pantone cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, coded just as the paper. So if you're printing on a coated paper stock, choose that. If you're printing on an uncoated paper stock, choose CMYK uncoated. And you'll see that now this new window opens up with all of these colors, tons of them. So that's the CMYK Pantone color book right there. So if I wanted to colorize that, a rich brown, I can simply just click on it and colorize it. Now you can also do blending and some other things. How many guys have had Illustrator class? It's called electronic illustration. Anybody had that yet? Probably not before typography. Okay. So I'm going to go through, and you can hold down the shift key and you can click on different parts. You can, if you do it with the black arrow tool, you try to click on stuff, it'll grab the whole thing. Now, so this is why I use the white arrow tool. It's called the direct selection tool. So you have to be careful not to click on the nodes and move them. But I may sit there and choose some of these colors to color this in. Obviously purple is not really the color of this boat, but I'm just grabbing any old color. But I might go from darker to lighter as this goes back. And the cool thing about this Pantone book is you have this darker to lighter. It's already figured out for you. So Pantone 67-16 has a 67-15, 14, 13, and so on. So you can kind of lighten it up. I'm going to sit here and lighten it up as I go and give the illusion of depth and I'm holding down the shift key when I'm clicking on these things, by lightening each of these sections up as I go. So you click on objects and hold down the shift key to grab more of them. Oops. Make sure you have to be really careful where you're clicking. Always zoom in. Otherwise, you're going to be clicked on something you don't want to be clicked on. But I'm holding down the shift key while I'm clicking, and I'm making this just a little bit lighter each time I go down. So, oops. Oh, we just discovered the problems that an open path gives us. I only wanted this part of the boat colorized. But you notice how it colorized like the ocean, or, well, the lake and everything? I didn't want that colorized. So what's happening is when I select this area right here, because it's open, and this is why I wanted to, in Photoshop, even though I messed up, I'm going to park this over here for just a second. In Photoshop, I messed up, and I kind of messed up on purpose because I wanted to show you the big PITA, the big pain in the you-know-what, about why you should close your paths. Because all I want to do is select this down here. What's it do? It selects everything. So when I try to colorize it, it grabs everything. Now, had I been much more careful about closing my paths, I wouldn't have had this problem. Closing the path in Illustrator, it's much, 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 much more difficult. Believe me, it is a huge challenge to try to close up paths in Illustrator. It sucks. For lack of a better word, it just sucks. So you're much better off going into Photoshop like I had before and going in there and zooming in and going, okay, I have got to get my pencil and I have got to close these up. And it's worth a little bit of, what do they say? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Ben Franklin said that, I believe, one of our founding fathers. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Now, what I will even do on something like this, because it doesn't recognize the edge of the Photoshop document, is I will go ahead and select all of this, and I will put a stroke, a black stroke on the outside of this. I can always crop that out. But I can go in here and go to stroke, edit and stroke, and tell it to outline it with, I'll do 2 pixels. And even though you can't really see it very well, it's out there. There's a black pixel right there, 2 of them. But if I do that, then it'll at least close the boat from the water. And then, you know, anything like this up here that's open, like right here, that's going to be an open path. So if I want to color the water blue and I want to color the land green, well, it's going to grab the land and the water because this is open. So I need to close these areas. Now you know why I went through and said, hey, you should close paths. You close paths either by drawing it in the first place or by, after you've got it scanned in, go in and close anything that's open, because it will give you nothing but fits. So I'm stuck now where I have to spend a lot more the pound of cure. I'm going to have to spend a lot more time in Illustrator trying to break stuff up, and it's a real pain in the rear end, a huge pain in the rear end. I would rather, even as a professional who knows how to use Illustrator really well, I would rather start over and go to Photoshop and clean stuff up and build my my closures here, close my paths. I would rather do this than go into Illustrator and spend hours trying to isolate stuff. It takes a long time to isolate stuff in Illustrator. Okay? So the Illustrator demo didn't take very long. It didn't take very long at all. I could sit there and clean this up and convert it again. I would have to do that. It would take me less time than it would to close all those paths in Illustrator. Oh, that's just a headache. But I will close them. I'll just do them here. Bring it back, retrace it. You know, practice makes perfect. Doing something twice never killed anybody. Well, like this, stuff like this. So I'll go in and just clean it up, re-import it, replace it into Illustrator. Oops. And all I'm doing is taking a pencil with a couple pixel radius, tighten things up. And now I'm going to save it, replace it in Illustrator, and retrace it. And I'll have a much better time of it. In fact, I'm going to move all of this. I'll place my new one. I don't know that I have everything completely closed up. But when I go to image trace, well, I can't just do it here. I got to go to window, image trace. It should remember the last setting that I did, so I'm going to hit preview. Yeah. And then I uncheck preview and hit trace. That's going to be a hard one for people to remember. And then in order to colorize it, you have to expand it. But now, theoretically, I should be able to click on this, colorize it anything I want to, and it doesn't go into the water. See? Closing paths is super important. Close your paths. Okay, if you've got open stuff you want to colorize. Otherwise, you have to draw separate paths, and it's a real pain. I mean, you can do it, but it's just pain. If I want to make this water, there, blue water. If I want to make those mountains green, great, green mountains. Now, the bad thing is I don't have closed paths up here, and so my mountains, I might wanted to color them dark green, lighter green, you know how things get lighter as they go back into the atmosphere. But I couldn't do that because I had open paths. So close your paths, and you'll have a much happier time with Illustrator. Okay. Now you could run some filters on here. Illustrator's mainly for flatter type work. If you're going to do things like what we did in Photoshop on our other demo, just do it in Photoshop. You know, get that as a little black line layer and do your thing that way. Because Illustrator and Photoshop are two completely different tools. This is for more flat color. You can do some really souped up three-dimensional stuff in here, don't get me wrong, but if you can do it in Photoshop for half the time, you might as well just use that software. So this is, again, a bit more flat, so to speak. Of course, I don't want purple boats, but I was just throwing a color in there. Okay, so there's a couple different ways to handle your graphics, either through a vector way, this is vector, or through more of a softer way, which was the Photoshop way. Let me open that colorize one. You know, this I need to spend more time on, but you know, sometimes I want flat, sometimes I want more details and a little bit more mid-tone highlight shadow. You know, a totally different look. These two have between the Photoshop and the Illustrator, very different approach. What's that? You can do either or. I wanted to share with you both because certain things will lend itself more to a vector-based type thing, and other things will lend itself better to a raster, more softer type stuff. Mine with the boat, I would think I'd gear more towards the Photoshop stuff. But if I were doing a different kind of thing, I might do the raster. It just depends on the artwork, how soft I want the colors, how much transition I want between shadow and how much depth something needs. This needs, to me, a little bit more depth because of the curve of the boat, which I can get in Illustrator, but it's just as easy for me to do it in Photoshop. Okay, so that's, I would save this as an EPS, by the way. So instead of format as Illustrator AI, save them as EPSs because they print better and it's industry standard. And then we'll place it in InDesign later. Okay, so that concludes the demonstration for Illustrator, live trace, and colorizing. Again, the most important thing, the biggest key, most important thing is making sure these paths are closed so that you can work with things independently of one another. And that was the problem that I was having, is my paths, my shapes were not closed shapes, they were open shapes. Oops. So you have to go in there and do a little plastic surgery sometimes. Alright, so there's that video. So I'm going to stop that.